Hi, everybody. Tim Hughes here. I'm the co-founder and CEO of DLA Ignite. With me today, I've got Peter Sprinett. Peter and I are going to be talking about the 5 biggest misconceptions of AI, artificial intelligence, and marketing. Peter, before we get into that, where can people get hold of you?
Okay, so it's very easy to find me on LinkedIn, Peter Sprinett. You'll find me very easily on LinkedIn. And you can always find me as well on my website, and that is brightcontent.co.uk. So that's brightcontent, all one word, .co.uk.
Do me a favor and spell your surname, because some people don't, English is their second language.
Sure, of course. So my second name is spelled Sprinett.
Good, fantastic. I did actually spell it right on my pad, so I'm pleased with that. I should do, because I've actually known you for 5 years, so I should actually know how to spell people's names by now.
Yeah,
Peter, for me, this is a really interesting area. Why don't you give us some context in terms of your background and some of the things that you've been involved in, and why you can talk about artificial intelligence, and especially, 5 negatives or misconceptions about it.
So, well, my background is writing about technology, and I've been doing that probably now for more than, about 20 years, I think. So I was writing about technology in the very earliest days of the web. I think one of my very first projects was working on a plan and a campaign to describe one of the very first e-commerce projects in the UK, which amazingly at the time took place out of one store in southwest London. And obviously we can see how that's grown and that's emerged. And I would use that maybe that's a nice way of describing how I've been very fortunate to see new technologies emerge, see how they've grown, very often failed, and perhaps learn to spot where you tend to see perhaps a little bit too much hype, and how you learn to actually study and identify the trends and the technology trends that are really going to dominate society and dominate business. So obviously that now probably includes things like obviously the web, mobile, cloud computing, and social media, I think, as well. So for my sins, I've been on Twitter since about 2007, I think it is. So I've seen that grow from a very cozy network to probably the most exciting and sometimes dangerous broadcasting channel that's ever existed. And that brings me up, I suppose, to today. So in the past sort of 4 or 5 years, I've been watching how companies have started learning, tech companies especially, have been learning about how artificial intelligence and machine learning and deep learning are affecting the way that they produce software. And that's meant that for about the past 3 or 4 years, I've been helping a lot of my clients communicate the benefits of their software to businesses and clients, to their customers who've heard of artificial intelligence. They might have heard of machine learning, and they kind of know its importance. And my job is to help the technology companies communicate genuine business advantage to those organizations, and obviously help them win new business in that way.
But we've had automation for years, haven't we? So,
well, yeah, we have.
The first robot was in Greek mythology, wasn't it? So,
well, yeah, you've had robots going back to Greek mythology. So there you're going back sort of 2,500 years or more. More recently, the example, I have to say, this only cropped up in my newsfeed today, but I was fascinated by it. I normally think of the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution as being towards the end or middle of the end of the 18th century in the north of England. But in fact, almost 200 years before that, you started seeing the very first examples of mechanized looms for weaving. And we're talking now about the 1580s. So to a UK listener, that's the era of Elizabeth I. And the story goes, this is a genuine invention, and the story goes that the Queen, Elizabeth I, in 1580 was so worried about the impact on the livelihoods of people who made stockings and wove things by hand, that she didn't give her approval to the patent. Although we do actually have, I do believe we have existing examples of that very early system of automation and mechanization. So I mean, that brings us up. I mean, we're still talking about automation today. This is the same thing that we hear time and time again when we hear that, you know, PwC, I think, has just announced today that it thinks, I'm going to have to check up on this, but I think it's something like 1/3 of all jobs will be automated by the mid 2030s. But of course, this has been going on for literally not just decades, but hundreds of years. And I think that's maybe the first misconception that people have about AI, which is that it's something new and it's coming to steal our jobs. Now, don't get me wrong, a lot of jobs are going to disappear because of AI, but these will largely be a lot of them will be mundane jobs, they will be manual jobs, they will involve computers, they will be the kinds of jobs that involve filling in spreadsheets and so on. But AI is going to change the job landscape. The argument goes that it will probably create more jobs than it actually destroys.
So before we get into talking about some of the misconceptions, what is AI for anybody that out there that doesn't know what AI? What is it?
Dreading that question. How long have we got? Let's keep it simple. I think the way that we look at AI now is that it's something that replicates a human activity. Now, that's not particularly useful because human activities are so diverse, and some of them are simple and some of them very complicated. So the way that I like to relate it to is a little bit to the senses, for example. So can a machine see as well as a human and use sight to make the same kinds of critical judgments that a human being would make? Can it listen and hear to sounds and imitate the human voice or speak like a human being would do? And actually, computers are getting quite good at doing those things. What they're not very good at so far is actually the deeper side of what it means to be human. So having a sense of purpose, having genuinely creative ideas that are developed on the back of emotions, these sorts of powers don't exist. So I always encourage people just to rein back their fears a little bit and to think more about some of the more practical applications of AI, and in particular in those sorts of areas. And hopefully in a moment or a bit later on, we'll talk a little bit more about creativity in the arts and how AI to a certain extent can create music and can write and create paintings as well.
Because one of your misconceptions that we talked about when we prepped this was that the AI is clever.
Well, it's clever. I'll tell you what it's very good at. It's very good at one thing that I'm terrible at, which is being focused. So its intelligence comes from the ability just to be able to sit down and go through, shed loads of data without needing any rest, without needing coffee, without needing feeding, without needing a pat on the back or feedback. So, for example, if you want to try and save lives or improve the success rate of identifying a disease via an X-ray, for example, then that's perfect for AI. You can feed it and you can train it with enormous amounts of data, and it will just go away and look at that data and teach itself. It will never get bored. It will never try and bunk off and go home early or anything like that. So if you want to define intelligence as focus, then I think that's a good way of defining AI.
And so so we've got artificial intelligence, we've got machine learning, we've got deep learning. It seems to me that this seems to be an industry of jargon.
Yeah. There's a lot of buzzwords around.
So how do we cut? So can you cut through some of that?
Yeah, of course. So I think what we need to do is when we talk about, let's start off with an algorithm, which I think is a word that gets thrown around quite a lot these days. An algorithm is a way of giving a machine or software a very simple set of instructions so that it can go off and work out things by itself. And the comparison I would use there is that, if you're writing software traditionally, you give the machine, you give the computer instructions through one line after the other of code in the old days. What you're able to do here is obviously you need to do the coding in the first place. You take that coding, you give those instructions, you give the software the training data, and you set it off running. So again, going back to the very common example that we use in these cases, which is X-rays, mammograms, for example, the software can learn very quickly from hundreds of thousands of examples of X-rays, and then use that to train itself to identify future X-rays that are likely to show the patient at risk.
And the classic algorithm that we deal with every day is the Facebook newsfeed or the LinkedIn newsfeed, which serves up certain things based on what the algorithm's told to serve up.
Absolutely, and this is another really important point, which is that algorithms are all around us. Now, again, this is probably more of a point for UK viewers or listeners, and obviously we've seen that in the recent problems that have occurred over the awarding of exam grades to students who couldn't take exams in the UK. But actually, it's all around us. So if you use social media, if you use a music streaming service like Spotify, which I do quite a lot, what I've noticed is the more that I use it, so the more data, the more information that I give it, the better its algorithms are at predicting new kinds of music or the next piece of music that I will listen to. And it's getting incredibly good at that now as well. So those algorithms are all around us, and combined with machine learning, they're the things that enable software to make these decisions, the kind of decisions that you'd expect a certain amount of human intelligence to be able to make itself. And then I think the one below that, which I think is another very important term, is deep learning and neural networks. And that's where you take things to the next level. It's where you have many different layers of algorithm and machine learning, all feeding off one another, all learning from one another, learning from their own mistakes. And this is the very, very sophisticated artificial intelligence, which leads to the world of deep fakes, for example. So videos and audio that appear to show a famous politician saying something and lip syncing it perfectly, when of course it's entirely fake news.
And so in terms of the we've looked at what the definition is. We've seen that that actually artificial intelligence isn't as clever necessarily as we think it can be. What's the next misconception that we have?
Well, I think the next misconception, if you allow me to start again, is that people very often mistake what I call incremental advances in technology with exponential advances in technology. So again, in very simple terms, if you see you see all these stories, these news stories all the time. If you see a news story that says artificial intelligence can write a news story for a journalist, if you see a report that says an artificial intelligence can compose music, or even today I collect these headlines. Even today, a headline that says artificial intelligence can write a book. Well, actually, what the authors of these pieces have done is they've extrapolated a very simple incremental achievement, which might be writing a very simple news article based on a sports result. It might involve composing a paragraph or two of copy, or it might involve composing a line or two of music. And then I think what happens is in people's minds say, well, if it can do that, if the machines can do that, then surely it's only a few stepping stones away from writing a complete song or a complete novel. And so on, and it's not. It's a very, very long way from doing that. So I think if you sort of see those headlines that tell you that creatives or sophisticated job roles are going to be eliminated, think twice and think very carefully. What AI is very good at is assisting creators in what they're doing in terms of what they're creating. So I can give an example of a French, I think it's French-Canadian composer called Benoit Carré, and he uses artificial intelligence to create snippets of music, or simple pieces of orchestration, and then other forms of MIDI software. And what he does there is he then weaves those different elements together to create a song. But there's a lot of effort. There's as much in human intelligence involved to create their song as there would be for a normal composer just to sit down and write something from scratch with a piano. So artificial intelligence in the arts is very much it's very much an assistant or a form of assistant.
I've seen that artificial intelligence wrote an AC/DC song, but in effect, what they've done is that they've put all of the data of
Yes.
every single AC/DC song, and then it comes up, it predicts something.
Yeah, it does. But even there, in that particular example, I mean, it was a very good pastiche, I suppose, of an AC/DC song. But there was a lot of work involved in tuning the lyrics and putting the music together. In fact, the real test of something like this is to give the machine, say, 12 seconds, give it the first 12 seconds of Hotel California by the Eagles, and then let it compose the rest of the song. And what you find there is that for about 10, so the first 12 seconds it listens to, the next 10 to 12 seconds are quite similar to the song, but then any resemblance between the original composition and then further on, any resemblance between music itself decays very, very rapidly. People like to, or artificial intelligence experts like to say that the software is hallucinating, which is a very polite way of saying it's starting to churn out nonsense. Actually, if you, there are, you know, so actually when it comes to composing music, it's not particularly good. But where it is getting very good at imitating people is when we come back to this idea of deep fakes. So now you do have software from Google, which enables you to input a little bit of sound, say, from a famous person, maybe Jay-Z or Arnold Schwarzenegger. And then you just simply key in or you feed up some text. So it could be to be or not to be, you know, the famous speech from Hamlet. And it will give you a perfect rendition of that speech in the voice of Jay-Z or Arnold Schwarzenegger. So again, it's a very good example of where there's a lot of misdirection, I think, that's going on at the moment. A lot of people worrying about things like, is my job going to go away? Will machines just be composing music and we won't need human beings? Actually, the biggest challenge with artificial intelligence at the moment is the spreading of fake information. So although artificial intelligence can't write a very good news story, a long news story based on facts, it can make up stories very, very easily. It can synthesize the voice of a famous politician very, very easily. And if you take it one step further, it's not just the fact that it's fake news or it's telling you something that is a lie. It's the ability to proliferate huge amounts of fake content into social media, into other channels, so that algorithms become confused, so that you're almost in what we call a hall of mirrors of content, and it's impossible, becomes impossible for either me as a consumer or even possibly the algorithm used by social media to distinguish between the true content and the fake content which is swirling around it.
So what's the next misconception that we have about AI then, Peter?
Well, I think the other one, which is like slightly related to this, is that people feel that, you know, AI, and I think businesses especially think that AI is a once in a lifetime event. So in other words, it's digital transformation in 1 year, and I'm going to deploy artificial intelligence. I'm going to do it in one big block, and then I will be digitally transformed. And
like a IT implementation, like a a new accounting system.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly that. We're gonna AI our systems. I mean, a lot of people, I think, you know, heads of innovation and heads of IT will know, obviously, that's patently not the case. I'd like to give a couple of examples, if I can, where I think AI is genuinely useful and how businesses are starting to use it in a really intelligent way. So take the current COVID crisis, the pandemic. What we're doing now, you know, hosting a video call and recording a video, that massive spike in the need for video conferencing drove enormous demand, obviously, for laptops, video cameras, and so on. But it also forced all the suppliers of those services, so be it Zoom or Google with Meet or Microsoft with Teams, it forced them to re-examine the quality of what they were offering. And as we all know, and certainly until recently, sometimes the sound would drop off. In some instances, my camera would be wonky and I wouldn't notice that, you know, my head was slipping above the screen, you know, halfway through the call. And so what we have now are, give you a couple of examples. So Microsoft, it's a really tiny fix, but they fixed it using artificial intelligence. So on their latest Surface laptops, the built-in cameras will now automatically look at you in the eye. They'll follow your eyes and track your eyes. They learn very quickly what you look like and where you're directing your gaze. So in theory, you're never going to be looking away from the camera or, you know, looking off screen or glancing away. And then you've seen, I think, something similar. Google did something similar with Duo, which is a digital voice communication system that they have. So again, they used artificial intelligence to learn how to fill in those gaps, those annoying gaps that occur during a conversation, and fill those in so that you don't get those awkward, dropouts where you sound as if you're down the other end of the corridor when you're speaking. So I think what's really interesting for me there is that it's not AI for the sake of it. It's AI being used in a really smart way to fix a really immediate need. And it's also, in theory, improving, therefore, the commercial performance of those organizations. So if I'm Microsoft and I've got Microsoft Teams and it's been bubbling away in the background, and then all of a sudden everybody's working from home, well, I better work out pretty quickly to make sure that it works as well as any other system on the marketplace. Hey, what have I got? I've got loads of data about how people use video conferencing, and I can use that to train my laptops, and I can use that to train the cameras that look at me when I'm doing a conference call.
And I think there's a certain amount of AI that's out there, which is basically it's looking for a solution. There's a number of things where it's here's this AI program, and you go, yeah, and what's it going to do? Or we don't know.
Yeah,
and it's good actually. People are looking for solutions that they can actually fit with AI. And I guess as you said, there's a certain amount of incremental ability to it, which is we'll find some small things, but slice the solutions rather than necessarily come up with some big answer.
Yeah, I mean, I watched a wonderful film called The Prestige the other day. Sorry, it's a film about magicians. And as I watched that film about how magicians work and the tricks that they play on the audience, I thought about that word which I've used before earlier on in this call, which is misdirection, which is a way of actually diverting you to look at something so that you miss the really important thing that's happening on stage or happening in the news. And I think you can see that all over the place. So I like to think of Elon Musk, for example. I mean, a brilliant entrepreneur and engineer, but is a great magician as well. So Elon Musk makes an enormous deal about the fact that he's going to deliver self-driving cars in the future, and he's promised, and that deadline keeps on getting pushed back. But what he does have, which is enormously valuable, is he has all these people buying cars, buying these Tesla vehicles. And these Tesla vehicles send back to him huge quantities of labeled data. And labeled data is sort of like it's the rocket fuel that drives artificial intelligence. And so, yeah, I think he does believe in self-driving cars, and that's the future of driving. But more important to him at the moment is just having that data that he can then use to train his software, that he can apply algorithms to, and complete and therefore stay out ahead of the rest of the field in the overall artificial intelligence space. I mean, he is the one person, if you were going to call up an AI entrepreneur, who would it be? He's probably the person most likely to be named if you gave him a survey.
And I guess, as you say, data is kind of the rocket fuel for AI to enable it to train itself and to get better. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, I would. But I would also say you don't have to be gathering data from a self-driving vehicle that's connected to Elon Musk's super digital brain. I saw a wonderful story last week, which was how British researchers created an algorithm that was able to go back and look at years and years of NASA data to identify. I think they identified about 50 new planets. Just simply because they could, because the software, like I said earlier on, was able to concentrate, review that data. They were able to apply algorithms to it in a way that enabled them to discover and find 50 new planets that were just lurking there in that data from scanning the skies for years and years. They were lurking there in that data, and all of a sudden they were able to discover this. So I think this is another myth. I think businesses think, well, I've got to somehow acquire data. I've got to get the data, and then I've got to buy some expensive machine learning software to run it through. And actually, both sides of the equation are, to a certain extent, false. So very often businesses are sitting on absolutely shed loads of data. A recurring phrase in this interview, I know, but that's what's really valuable. And increasingly, we now see companies, Google, Amazon and Microsoft, three very good examples, which are offering what I would call cloud machine learning services. So this is a way of simply using very, very powerful cloud software, using those organizations' enormous IT resources to upload your data or to run your data, and to use sophisticated machine learning tools to start identifying patterns, and maybe even give those machine learning tools instructions to sort of direct it towards the kind of patterns or the information that would be useful to your business. So I think that's a very important, differentiator. We haven't really talked about costs now, but the cost of using machine learning and becoming a genuine AI business is plummeting enormously, and we'll see that continue.
I think it will be like video recorders and iPods. The price will come down.
Yeah, they will absolutely plummet. Yeah.
And I don't know who it was that said that AI will be as prevalent as websites, but there's AI on your mobile phone already. If you set an alarm frequently, it starts saying, do you want to set the alarm? There's good stuff. So if we want to be into AI, how do we get into it?
I think the most important thing is to take a step back, read lots. I know that's a really obvious statement to make. I think that it's very important that you have the ability to go out and start learning now. And there are organizations with there are so many education resources where you can learn about AI, and you think about that across the whole spectrum. So if you decide that you want to be, you want to change career and become a data scientist or a software engineer who can work within this field, then you can find plenty of courses out there. I think if you Google education AI, then you will get Google's own series of online courses. And increasingly, these organizations are creating these courses, not just out of the goodness of their heart, but because they're creating them as an alternative to traditional forms of academic learning. They expect people to actually have gone through their own courses before they apply for a job. And the second one I'll mention very, very quickly, because it's aimed at school children between the ages of 5 and 18. But actually, don't be put off by that. If you're approaching AI for the very first time, it's an IBM series of courses. So I think if you look and Google the obvious terms, you'll find that IBM K-12 series of learning modules, and I would really recommend that you do that. The final anecdote, if I can just give about this, which I think really puts it all in perspective, is we were talking a little bit earlier on about journalism. And we were talking about how, the robots are coming along and they're going to write all our news stories. They're even going to write simple news stories. And actually, that's not the case. So I'm just going to check quickly my notes here. But there is an organization in the UK which has completely adapted its way of writing news. And this is what they do. They are set up to trawl through all the different publicly available sources of data from the UK government. And what journalists are trained to do is not just to write, but to actually work out through their own understanding of data and data analysis what kind of possible patterns might be in that data. So they are still journalists, so you can call them data journalists if you want. And what they do is they then write templates, and they create templates into which those stories can then be dropped. And maybe I'm not explaining it very well, but again, I think you can find that story very, very easily online. But the key point about it is that if you are a journalist, your job is not going to go away. If you're a musician, your job is not going to go away. If you're an IT consultant, your job isn't going to go away. It is just going to change. And the best thing you can do now is to get in there early and understand the direction of travel for your particular career, begin learning, and then I'm not being scary when I say this. I think there's probably a 3 to 5 year window that if you use that time wisely now, you will be perfectly positioned to take advantage of the time where AI is as ubiquitous as web pages and mobile phones, which is where we're going to be in probably 3 to 5 years' time.
Yeah. Peter, that's fantastic. Really enjoyed that.
It's been a pleasure.
Fantastic anecdotes and research that you put into that. Really appreciate it. I say this every time to people, but I always learn something by doing these. And it's a bit of a cliche to say that you're a lifelong learner, but I I learned so much, and doing the research on it is always so fantastic as well. Thank you so much. And I'm going to have to mention the books behind your head, but it's you've impressed me, you know, with those books. So
actually, the one I'd recommend, I'm just going to recommend one of them, if that's allowed. Am I allowed to do this in your?
Yeah, sure, of course.
If you want to know what AI is up against, I'm not sure if that's reversed. I'll read it out. It's
Behave: The Biology of Humans at Our Best and Worst, by Robert Sapolsky.
That's right. It's a brilliant introduction to the human brain. If you really want to understand and blow your mind, it's a good turn of phrase. If you understand how sophisticated the human brain is and how much hard work computers will need to do to catch up with this grey matter inside our skulls, it's a very good read and very recommended.
I mean, we're in a situation where computers still don't understand sarcasm. They don't understand emotion. Yes. You know, they don't understand purpose. There's all of the things which are human related. They still have, you know, as you said, we can replicate a lot of the automation that we can of certain things, but there's so many attributes of a human which you can't automate.
And one last thing that I should mention, because it is so important, they're also only as good as the data that you give them. So we still find unforgivable examples of bias in many of the applications that we see of artificial intelligence, simply because they're using old data, which is based on, you know, ways of thinking and ways of
white males. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So I just wanted to make that point, because it sometimes gets overlooked, and it really is critical to the future of society as well as software.
So remind everybody where they can get hold of you, Peter.
Yeah, sure. So it's Peter Sprinett. I'll spell the name again. It's SPRINGETT. You can find me very easily on LinkedIn, and then you can find me very easily on my website, which is brightcontent.co.uk.
Peter, that's been excellent. Really love talking to you and sharing your knowledge about AI. It's something that we, something that I, you know, it just changes all the time. And all of your little anecdotes as well has been fantastic. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tim. It's been a pleasure.
And I'll talk to you soon.
Yep. Speak soon, Tim.